Attention! This video will contain major spoilers for Tears of the Kingdom. If you don't want to get spoiled, I suggest you go and beat the game and come back later. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild, has finally been released, and right off the bat, people are already saying that it's a masterpiece. Breath of the Wild was described in the same way, but when we took a more critical look into it, when we did the Game That Broke Zelda video, we saw that it was a good experience to be sure, but it was not a masterpiece. So, will that hold true for Tears of the Kingdom? Well, that's what we're going to find out today, so sit back, relax, and get ready, because today we're taking a deep dive into Tears of the Kingdom, the Zelda game that was almost perfect. Before we dive head first, let's first take a breath and look back at the game that set the new standard for open world Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild broke the conventions of Zelda in a plethora of ways. Now, we're not going to go too deep into that topic. If you want to know more, you can check out the Game That Broke Zelda video, but I want to look at the main highlights of Breath of the Wild and what it set as the new standard. Well, first off, like I said, it broke conventions and it set a new standard. No longer did you have traditional dungeons, no longer did you have a linear story. The story was meant to be open-ended for you to find in many, many ways. With Breath of the Wild also introducing a brand new weapon system, durability system, a brand new physics engine, and overall approaching the open world concept for Zelda in a very broad way, allowing a player to literally do anything and go anywhere, making it to where no matter what situation you're in, no matter what point in the game you're in, you can take on any situation as long as you have the skill and the know-how. The soundtrack, though maybe not as memorable as other Zelda titles, was overall really good and always set the tone perfectly. The Divine Beasts and the Shrines were all very open-ended and very well designed. The second thing I'd like to focus on is the Breath of the Wild story. Well, Link wakes up from a 100-year slumber, losing all of his memories, and he awakes to see a destroyed and decayed Hyrule. Breath of the Wild seemed to set up a very mysterious story, allowing us to piece together what happened in the past. Except the mystique and the mystery is immediately ruined right at the start, as it's spoiled for us by the king. After the long exposition dump, the way that the story is mainly told is through memories, and the memories more paint just extra details for what we already know occurred. All the champions ended up dying, Zelda sealed herself away to hold Ganon back, and they all collectively lost the battle against Calamity Ganon when he returned. Now, of course, at the end of Breath of the Wild, Link retrieves all of his memories and is at full strength to take on Calamity Ganon. He inevitably slays the beast along with Zelda, which then leads the spirits of the champions and the king to finally lay to rest, allowing them to finally rebuild Hyrule. Now, Breath of the Wild did a lot of good things, however, it was not without fault. The world, as massive as it is pretty barren when you look at the actual variety that's in the game. It does have a good variety of stuff to do, but the problem is that the world is so large, the variety doesn't reflect that vastness, meaning that there's tons of dead time between objectives. Another issue is that Breath of the Wild story didn't seem to really reflect upon the world. Divine beasts were causing havoc, but you didn't really see or really feel any kind of major impact. The only area that felt like had something wrong with it was Hyrule Castle itself. Speaking of divine beasts, they're all really well designed, but extremely short, to the point where they can be completed in 20 to 15 minutes. And the climax of the Divine Beasts, being the bosses, aren't anything to write home about, and they're all pretty one-note and basic. The final boss wasn't anything to write home about, as it pretty much just ended up becoming one massive interactive cutscene, and there were also a few random little issues like the climbing system being really slow and annoying. The clothing system was also really obnoxious, meaning you had to swap clothes consistently, and the incentive for exploration was kind of lost towards mid to late game, because at that point, there was no real point to explore. There was nothing you would actually get out of it. So the biggest things to really take away from all that I've said is that Breath of the Wild was a fantastic experience. It set a brand new standard and opened the door to open world Zelda, but Breath of the Wild was not perfect, and it definitely had room to improve. So now with all their bases covered, let's see if Tears of the Kingdom learn from Breath of the Wild's mistakes and triumphs, and see if it really can be called a masterpiece. Let me set the scene for you. The game starts right at the end of Breath of the Wild, where you and Zelda are exploring underneath Hyrule Castle as you investigate this new substance called gloom. As you travel through the darkened halls, you come across a mural describing the imprisoning war. We'll come back to this later. As you reach the end of these claustrophobic corridors, and the ambience grows to its climax, you come face to face with the mummified remains of Ganondorf. And in a flash, Link is quickly subdued. The Master Sword is shattered, and you become separated from Zelda as she falls into the darkness and suddenly disappears. All while a mysterious hand grabs you and holds you above the chasm that is collapsing beneath you, saving you from certain doom. And dang, what an opening! Right out of the gates, this game is setting up a huge stage with one of the scariest Ganondorfs ever. As you finally awake, you see Link's arm has been replaced with a mummified arm that isn't yours. You're then guided to the decayed and destroyed Master Sword, where it's completely lost all of its power and practically disintegrated. And as you work through these corridors, eventually, just like in Breath of the Wild, you're led up to a perch where you're finally able to dive. And as you dive to the islands below, you can just see how vast this world is. And hot damn! It shows the true beauty of Tears of the Kingdom. The colors that they chose, the way that the light reflected off it all, it was just wow! And I'm telling you, man, this game looks so much more cinematic and beautiful in comparison to Breath of the Wild. It's insane. And the positives don't stop there. The soundtrack is a whole lot better this time, remixing old Zelda tracks to a more ambient tone, and bringing back some really good memorable tracks from Breath of the Wild's era. And the Great Sky Island again proves this in spades. As you land, the tone and the ambience is set perfectly, as that soundtrack subtly comes in and out, immersing you that much more into this new world. Now, as you continue through what effectively is the tutorial section, you're introduced to a new character, that character being Rauru, and it turns out that the arm that you have is his own arm, the same arm that saved you. He acts as the guide for the starting area. Also, you get introduced to a brand new set of abilities, and the brand new physics engine. You'll be told that you have to go through a set of shrines to attain new abilities for your arm, which sounds like a pretty oddly familiar setup, but we'll get back to that later. Now, unlike the previous game where you had the Sheikah Slate and the runes, this time you're given the Pura Pad, which acts like a dumbed down Sheikah Slate. But you still have a slew of abilities that are all connected to your arm. And let me tell you, these abilities are awesome. First, there's the Ascend ability. This ability allows you to travel upwards as long as there's some kind of area above you to travel towards, which means that you're able to travel through either solid rocks, mountains, or platforms to get on top of them, which kind of ends up being extremely broken as it allows you to break the game in tons of different ways and just turn shrines on their heads. Rewind allows you to reverse the momentum of an object. This ability is extremely handy, especially when you're trying to get to a higher ledge and a rock or a platform falls down below. You can rewind it, carrying you upwards so you can get back up to the higher platform. There's also the Fuse ability, which is one of the biggest new additions. Any weapons that you pick up are degraded, and because of that, they're extremely weak and fragile. And the only way you're going to be able to actually have a strong weapon is to fuse it with materials. The amazing thing is that the Fuse ability has a plethora of combinations. You can fuse things to your shield or your sword, and depending on what you fuse, gives special effects, like fusing a flamethrower onto your shield, creating a flame shield, or fusing a massive plank to a sword to create a sword that has the ability to use wind gust to push enemies back. The combinations are endless. You also can use the fuse ability to fuse things to your arrows, meaning instead of just having the basic fire, ice, and bomb arrows, now you have an extremely wide variety of arrow types. Ultra Hand allows you to make and build anything. Literally anything. The game also provides you with Zonai devices, which all have their own special perks and attributes. You'll use Ultra Hand a lot, and trust me, you're going to want to do so. At first, I was really nervous about this ability, thinking that it would be intrusive, but by the end of the game, I can't imagine playing any game without Ultra Hand. And auto build only makes your life even easier in this aspect. Now, auto build you actually find in the depths, and we'll talk more about the depths in a minute, but effectively, auto build actually lets you save things that you've built in the past and reconstruct them far easier and quicker instead of you having to build it piece by piece. With all these abilities, it truly makes the game feel like Play-Doh. You can do whatever you want, go wherever you want, and your only limit is your imagination. And what's even cooler is that these abilities can actually work in tandem. Now, as you finally leave the Sky Island, you finally drop down back to the surface of Hyrule, and this is where the game truly shines. Tears of the Kingdom is huge. I mean, like, really huge. Tears of the Kingdom has 3 separate areas. You have the Sky area, which you started your adventure in, which features an array of floating islands, each with their own things to discover. And there's now the brand new area called the Depths, the darkest areas of Hyrule underneath the actual Earth. This area is effectively hard mode, where enemies hit harder and any damage you take is permanent, unless you leave the depths or find a light route. The depths have great loot and materials to find, not to mention forges, as well as bargaining statues, which allow you to get special materials and items that you can't get normally. And of course, there's the main area, the main overworld. And sure, it is definitely a reuse of Breath of the Wild, but it's done so in the best way possible. There is tons to do in Tears of the Kingdom. There are caves, frogs that you can hunt. There's a guy who has a sign that keeps falling over that you can help. There are enemy encampments. You can join monster control groups and take on enemy bases. There are treasure maps to find which lead to better armor sets. Tons of side quests, stables, new overworld bosses, light route, shrines, towers, sages, wills, Koroks, temples. Oh my god! There is such a huge variety that you will literally not go 5 seconds without looking and seeing something else to go and explore and do. Now, as large as this world is, you'd think that travel would be a huge pain, but it's not. Not only can you teleport to temples, shrines, or light routes, there are also shrines up in the sky, meaning now you can also dive to areas that are closer and easier to get to. And if you're trying to get from point A to point B, well, the Ultra Hand's got you covered, because with the Zonai devices, you can build flying machines like air bikes, or you can build cars like battle tanks or a motorcycle. So Tears of the Kingdom offers you a massive variety of travel options. So no matter what, you can get to where you're going and you can get there quickly, making the whole world not only feel vast, but easily accessible. And on top of there being more variety and things to explore, the incentive for exploration is so much better in this game. Because you need materials to fuse and upgrade and craft with, well, now every material actually has a legitimate purpose. Every material is needed. This is exactly what an open world Zelda game should be like. And the positives keep on coming. Of course, this game has great combat. The combat system is straight from Breath of the Wild. But now, thanks to the Fuse system and Ultra Hand, there are 1,000 new ways to engage enemies. Combat is so much more expansive in this game than ever before. Honestly, Tears of the Kingdom is just putting Breath of the Wild to shame right now, but it doesn't stop there. Shrines are a whole lot better now. Sure, you got a few outliers that might be extremely simple, but overall, the shrines are far better designed. And thanks to the new abilities, you can break them in many different ways. These feel like a true evolution, where not only is there multiple ways to solve a shrine, but there are ways to break the shrine outright, and it's awesome. Not to mention the aesthetic of the shrines is just far better in my opinion. And with better designed shrines, also means better designed dungeons. And this is one of my favorite things. Tears of the Kingdom finally gives us proper temples and dungeons, and the lead up to them is awesome. You end up going to these phenomenons all throughout the world, and when you get there, something is strangely amiss. For example, there's an intense blizzard at Rito Village, causing them to lose food. And then you get to actually work with characters that were introduced in Breath of the Wild that all get great character glow-ups. It's so awesome! The temples have these amazing lead-ups where you actually have to climb up to them or travel down to reach them. These temples just scream Zelda to me. Each one is uniquely designed with an amazing OST accompanying them, and they all have beautiful aesthetics. Most of them have pretty intricate puzzles, and they're just an absolute joy to go through. And once you finally get past the dungeon and make your way through, you'll end up coming against a boss. A proper boss. That's right, Tears of the Kingdom has proper boss fights, and they're all awesome. The boss fights are all engaging, and you have to tackle them in many different ways. And God, I just love their designs so much, and these fights are amazing. And there are also overworld bosses. Of course, you have your Hinox and your Stone Taluses, but now we have Gleeoks, old NES enemies that are finally back from the dead, and they are terrifyingly strong. You also have the new construct fluxes and lurking beasts in the depths that you all have to face. The bosses are overall just a massive improvement, and they're all a joy to go through. Now, as you work with these characters that came from Breath of the Wild, well, it turns out they're sages, and as you complete the end of each temple, their power awakens, and they each gain their own secret stone. And this leads to one of the coolest things in all of Tears of the Kingdom, where they actually get to join you, and you end up having your own little army. Each sage has their own special ability to use. There's Unibo's ability, which effectively turns into a big old cannonball. There's Riju's ability, which creates a massive electric field where you shoot your arrow, it creates a lightning strike on them. There's Sidon's ability, which gives you a water shield and or allowing you to launch a semi-long range attack with water. There's Tulin, who's probably the best one out of the bunch, which lets you have a gust of wind pushing you forward, which can get you just over those gaps that you can't quite get across. And probably my favorite one, the final sage, the Sage of Spirit, also known as Minoru, who has has a fucking battle mech, and not to mention she has an entire battle mech boss fight, which is awesome. This battle mech actually lets you fuse materials and weapons to it, which means you can upgrade the battle mech to be even stronger and more versatile. What? And of course, a Zelda game is not a Zelda game without a story, and Tears of the Kingdom story is awesome. We have an amazing cast of characters this time around, and we get to learn through these tears that have come off of this golden dragon of what happened in the past, what happened to Zelda. And what's awesome about these tears is that there's actually a temple called the Forgotten Temple, and once you go there, it shows you the proper order and the locations of where to find these things, which lets you see the entire story from start to finish without messing anything up or making things confusing, which is very well done. It turns out she's flung back into the past by what's called a secret stone, where we see Ganondorf in his prime, trying to take over Hyrule. We also get to see Rauru and Sonia, apparently the first rulers of Hyrule. The story is amazing and will make you feel so many things, not to mention one of the biggest plot twists in the game. I couldn't believe it. You see, this game has tons of holy shit moments, and one of the biggest holy shit moments is right here in the main story, where we find out about this forbidden art, where if you swallow a secret stone, something that was passed down from the Zonai, it turns you into a dragon, where you lose yourself but gain immortality. Well, Zelda actually gains the Master Sword, as before we leave the Great Sky Island, the sword actually travels back into the past, back to Zelda, allowing it a great amount of time to heal, which sets up the Imprisoning War, which we mentioned way back beforehand. The Imprisoning War is a war where Rauru recruited sages in order to fight against Ganondorf and take him down once and for all, but sadly the battle doesn't go their way, and Rauru, as a final ditch effort, seals Ganondorf away, sealing his magic as best as he can, but at the cost of his own life. Because of this, Zelda takes matters into her own hands, getting the sages to pledge their allegiance to help fight alongside Link in the future, along with taking the Master Sword and swallowing a secret stone, losing herself and becoming the golden dragon that we see in-game. And what's even crazier is that Nintendo plays with this idea, as when we first dive down to the Great Sky Island, you can see her floating through the sky, passing the Sky Island, still holding to the Master Sword all these years for us to reclaim, using her power and her magic to give us that one tool that can finally put the hurt on Ganondorf. And when we finally do reclaim the Master Sword, just wow, it is such an epic moment. And amazing as this whole story is, and all these amazing moments, it all comes to a head at the final confrontation. You make your way to what's known as the Gloom's Approach. This area is swarmed with high-level enemies. This is a gauntlet that will test your skill. But as you make your way deeper and deeper, you end up back where you started the game, as you finally make your way back to the Sealing Chamber to the Gloom's origin. And this is where the final fight begins. You are facing off against the Demon King's army. This is an amazing climactic battle where you're facing off against wave after wave of enemy types. And this fight is not a joke. If you're underprepared, this fight is going to be tough, as these enemies hit hard and have high level weaponry. But as you work your way through wave after wave after wave, all the bosses you actually defeated previously reappear. But luckily, the sages join you into the battle, as they hold off the beasts, allowing you to get deeper into where Ganondorf truly lies. And this is where the true fight begins. Ganondorf is fully revived, and now it's come down to a 1v1. Ganondorf is not a joke. He will hurt you bad. He has an amazing array of weaponry, and attacks with extreme speed. Your only true hope is either A, spamming arrows at the man, or B, using Flurry Rush to your advantage. But as you whittle down his health, you finally think you have the upper hand. But then his second phase begins, where his health bar reaches past the freaking screen! This is when he's in his Demon King state. One hit from him will make you permanently lose a heart. But here's the crazy thing. Ganondorf can use Flurry Rushes too, which means when you swipe, he'll dodge your attacks just like you would, which creates this amazing intense moments where you're dodging his attacks in slow motion, trying to land a hidden, and it is crazy. And he is ferocious. He begins to spawn multiple Phantom Ganons all over the place, as you have to take them on by yourself. But luckily, the sages start to pour in to back you up. And as you finally land that one good hit, you finally put Ganondorf down. Or so you think. Ganondorf won't go down easy, and he refuses to lose this fight. So in a final attempt, he does the very thing that's forbidden that Zelda did, and swallows his secret stone. Ganondorf then takes a new form, the final stage of the fight, the Demon Dragon. Now this fight is mainly spectacle, but damn it if it is not awesome! The music is intense, and you're actually joined by Zelda in her dragon form as she swoops and saves you and flies you up into the air, allowing you to put the hurt on the Demon Dragon. And this fight is so cinematic. I was in awe in this fight from start to finish, and I loved every second of it. You truly feel the impact of every hit you put on this guy. And though it might be cinematic, the Demon Dragon is still a danger, as a touch from him will cause you to lose your hearts permanently. But as you whittle his health down, you finally see your chance to deliver the final blow. As the stone on top of his head glows, you dive bomb straight down towards him as it breathes with its menacing fire, finally landing on its head and putting that final hit straight dead center through its forehead. And once the dragon is finally slain, the day is saved. And thanks to Rauru towards the start of the game giving you his arm, it allows you to use the power of both Rauru and his wife Sonia to revert Zelda back to her dragon stage. And then this creates one of the most beautiful parallels ever, as the final portion of the game sees you diving after Zelda to save her. At the beginning of the game, Zelda fell and Link tried to dive after her and was not able to save her. But this time, there's no way Link is letting her fall, as the game lets you have control to finally catch her and not let her fall for a second time. And just wow. Wow! What a fucking ending! What a game! But as much as I love talking about all the positives and how amazing this game is, it's not perfect, and Tears of the Kingdom does have its flaws. Whether you like to admit it or not, Tears of the Kingdom is not perfect, and it does have flaws. Starting with the biggest and most egregious one is the amount of grinding in this game. From materials to fuse with your arrows, for materials to upgrade your batteries, for materials to upgrade your armor. There is so much bloody grinding, it is insane. Now luckily, I was on version 1.0, which has item duping, and trust me, I did not feel bad abusing the shit out of that. Thanks to item duping, I cut down the grind time by probably half, but it still took hours to get the materials necessary for me to upgrade, and it was insane. It genuinely felt like there was a point where Nintendo was just padding out game time to make it feel like the game was longer than it actually was. And this leads me to my next issue, the length of the main quest. You see, the main temples are awesome, very well designed, but 3 out of 4 of them are very short. These temples just didn't last long. Hell, the entire main quest line didn't last that long at all. The main quest could pretty much be completed in about 5, maybe 10 hours, which is a far cry from pretty much any other Zelda game. Now don't get me wrong, I poured 200 hours into this game, but that was because I was doing a lot of the side content and getting sidetracked, which is the main draw of Tears of the Kingdom. But the main quest is just really short. And the thing is that it's really good. I wanted more, but there wasn't any more for me to have. Another one of the biggest issues is the story's timeline placement, and also Nintendo's own damn stubbornness. Nintendo refuses to let us know where the hell this thing rests in the timeline, but it's almost like Nintendo is also purposely making it difficult for this game to be in a timeline, as it seems to retcon and mix stuff up that's already been established. It's almost like they went out of their way to make this story really good, but also really annoying as it retcons and changes things that don't need to be changed or are already been pre-established. And they could easily fix this by saying the past of Tears of the Kingdom takes place in a totally different era, but they refuse to do so, and it's just so annoying. As much as I love the story, I was getting so confused because as a Zelda fan that's been following this game since my childhood, I was having a hard time understanding where the fuck this game was supposed to take place. Furthermore, there are also more minor issues. For example, the arrow system for fusing is just, you can't preset bundles of arrows where you can use them consistently. Instead, you have to open up your inventory every single time to select whatever you want to use and use it again and again and again and again. To make matters worse, another flaw is the inventory system in general. It's just extremely convoluted and overpacked, where materials and monster parts and food items are all crammed into one big old section. And the quick swap menu to fuse items are also terribly used. This could have easily been fixed by adding a way to favorite certain items, allowing you to pre-select them so you use the ones that you prefer to use, but they don't give you that option. The Sage abilities, they're really annoying to use. The only way to actually use these abilities is if you walk up to the Sage directly and press A to activate it. And trust me, this will never happen. The biggest time you're actually going to need them is in a fight. But they end up running all over the place, fighting enemies on their own accord, which is awesome. But when I need freaking Riju for a big electric shock, I don't want to be chasing her across the fucking battlefield. This makes the Sage abilities really unreliable because you can't use them in the situations you need to, which makes it to where you just kind of default to battling on your own and letting them do their own thing and not even using their Sage abilities. And sadly, the issues don't end there. Of course, the Koroks are back. I mean, who would have thought? Everyone knows how annoying the Koroks can be. Now, thankfully, thanks to the variety in this game, I actually didn't mind finding Koroks as much as I did in Breath of the Wild. In fact, I kind of liked them for being a nice pace breaker. But of course, they're linked to your inventory system, which means you have to find a few to actually get a good amount of inventory. But that number keeps going up and up and up to being astronomically large, and then you get to a point to where collecting Korok seeds means nothing, aside from getting a golden poop, again, once you 100%. Bro, Nintendo, really? Again with this? This wasn't funny the first time. There's also issues with final rewards and post-game. You see, when you complete a lot of the major stuff in Tears of the Kingdom, you get some rewards, but they're not good. For example, getting all the light roots gets you a random flower bud thing that says you got all the light roots. Cool. And the only actual good final reward is when you complete all the shrines, which allows you to have the Ancient Heroes aspect, which is probably one of the best items in the game, for sure, and one of my favorite final rewards, but it's the only good final reward. Now jumping back over to post-game, once you pretty much beat Tears of the Kingdom, that's it. I genuinely felt like that Master Mode should have just been a given and already in the game. Or at least New Game Plus, that randomized item locations, or something. Furthermore, there's a really big issue with audio when it comes to speaking characters, which is an issue that's actually kind of persisted since Breath of the Wild. There are several points where characters are talking, but you can barely even understand them or hear them. Heck, in even some cutscenes, a character will sound really quiet, only for the next character to sound perfectly fine. The audio balancing in this game is just really weird. It's like Nintendo forgot to turn up the volume on half the characters. A lot of the inherent issues that Breath of the Wild has are also still in Tears of the Kingdom. The only reason they're not felt as hard is because thanks to Ultra Hand and Zonai materials, you can circumvent them, but that doesn't fix the problem. It's more of a band-aid solution. Trying to climb is extremely unreliable and you end up just using Zonai devices to get around it. Horses don't control all that well, and again, you end up using Zonai devices to get around it. The stamina system is also really obnoxious, and again, you end up using Zonai devices to get around it. There's also an issue with auto build. You see, auto build, as cool as it is, it requires you having to yank all the materials out of your inventory and dropping them on the ground. But there's no way to actually see what items you need. So you might pull too many of your Zonai devices out, and you can't take them back, which means you've wasted them. They could have easily fixed this by allowing auto build to automatically pull from your inventory, so that way you didn't have to do that. And or give some kind of menu pop-up that showed you what materials you needed. The clothing system has also not been improved since Breath of the Wild. You will end up having to swap a lot between clothings in this game. And what's really annoying is that this also could have easily been fixed. On the actual scroll wheel for all the abilities, they added a random map button that's completely useless that you don't actually need. They could have easily made this a clothing button that had your favorite outfits presetted, so you could flip to it, select an outfit, and it automatically apply it to you. Another odd nitpick that I have is that Tears of the Kingdom reuses a lot of setup from Breath of the Wild. The biggest, most obvious example of this is the Great Sky Island. You have a dead ghost king guiding you on a massive island that you can't leave, taking you to very specific shrines, each of them to grant you a new ability that then teaches you through tutorial section on how to do it. In hindsight, this is probably the most effective way of getting the player accustomed to these abilities, is having this kind of setup. I mean, the Great Plateau is one of the greatest non-hand-holding tutorial sections ever in video games, but I don't know, man. It didn't really feel like they tried that hard to shake things up. And of course, the main overworld map has been reused. Again, not a massive issue, especially with all the new stuff that they added, and the terrain feels a bit different. And the general setup is just a pretty big reuse of Breath of the Wild. Like how all the sages are effectively all the champions from the previous title. They even have the same voice actors, which is fine, but it doesn't seem like they try and make an effort to make these characters sound any different from the champions from the previous game. Moreover, the Great Sky Island isn't the only thing that suffers from a lot of reuse. For example, after completing every dungeon, you're given a cutscene talking about the Imprisoning War. But every single cutscene related to this is the exact same. It's not a massive issue or anything, it's just something that I found a little jarring. But I digress. We've looked at the positives, and we've looked at the negatives. So now, let's put it all together. So, what's the reality of it all? Is Tears of the Kingdom a masterpiece, or overhyped? Well, if this video isn't proof enough already, then I'll be blunt. Tears of the Kingdom is phenomenal. This was the easiest 200 hours I have ever synced into a game. It is nearly flawless. Tears of the Kingdom improves over Breath of the Wild's design in so many ways, and gives the player so much more freedom. With all the new mechanics and ideas, I think it was well worth the wait. Furthermore, there are definitely areas that need to be improved upon with this game. But I do think that the best way to play Tears of the Kingdom is definitely on version 1.0, since it allows for item duping and cuts down on a lot of the grind time, which is one of the biggest issues. But even with these issues, a lot of them just come up to being minor annoyances at the long run of things. When looking at the game as a whole, it's fantastic. The game looks beautiful. The combat is amazing. The physics in the game is extremely open. The world is massive with such a massive variety of things to do. It controls great. The ideas that are presented are amazing. The shrines are better. Exploration is improved. The story is great. And the dungeons have improved. Bosses are awesome. And the final ending and the final boss is just fantastic. And in a lot of ways, this is the game that I felt like we should have gotten at the start. Funny enough, that was actually my biggest fear as I played through Tears of the Kingdom. Going back to Breath of the Wild now is going to be near impossible for me because it just feels like a lesser version of Tears of the Kingdom. And at this point, if a person came up to me and asked me which game they should play first, I'd tell them to skip Breath of the Wild and jump right to Tears. In fact, playing Breath of the Wild now feels more like a proof of concept when in comparison to Tears of the Kingdom. Furthermore, with all that was reused in Tears of the Kingdom and how better executed it was, it kind of feels like Tears was the game they wanted to make all along. And Breath of the Wild is more of a stepping stone to just see how people would take to an open world Zelda. Because when comparing these two games side by side, Breath of the Wild feels just so watered down. Don't misunderstand me. I will always respect Breath of the Wild because it literally allowed us to have Tears of the Kingdom. It gave birth to open world Zelda. However, Tears is just a better game overall. It improves on so many aspects of Breath of the Wild and gives us so many new additions. It's crazy to think that Tears of the Kingdom originally started out as just added DLC for Breath of the Wild and ended up blossoming into its own full experience that, for all intents and purposes, leaves Breath of the Wild in the dust. At this point, Tears of the Kingdom has set a new standard for open world Zelda, and I'm ecstatic to see what the future holds for the franchise. But until then, I think, as far as Tears of the Kingdom is concerned, it might not be a masterpiece, but I will always consider it an almost perfect Zelda game.